Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts, and Bill Barlee's with us. He's our resident storyteller and historian for all sorts of things that happened in the early days of British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest development. We've talked on this program before of the concept of the Silvery Slocan, and we go there again, but to talk about a town we haven't mentioned before, and for good reason, I guess.
Well, not really for good reason. It's it's a town we've held back, Mike, essentially. It was called the Lucerne of Canada by Robert Thornton Lowry, whom I consider the best newspaper editor in the Old West.
Lucerne because it was like Switzerland?
Because it was like Switzerland. Mountain peaks going up to 9,000 or 10,000 feet, a pristine inland lake, everything going for it. And so we really haven't talked about it, and we follow the history of this town for about 100 years, Mike.
And what's the name of this town?
And this town is a town they first called El Dorado. We know it by the name New Denver.
New Denver. So it would be Silvery because Denver, of course, is Silver
Sure.
Town. Okay, we'll do that. When we come back from this break, a look at New Denver. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, only today we should call it Silver Fields, I suppose, because we're talking about the silver country that was discovered in and around the Silvery Slocan.
Yeah.
1991.
Yeah, interesting year. Key year for the entire Slocan district. Two prospectors, a guy called Eli Carpenter, roustabout, French-Canadian, and his partner, his erstwhile partner, did not stay partner for very long, Jack Seaton, who's an Irishman, and they set out on a prospecting trip from Old Ainsworth.
That's down on the Kootenay Lake.
That's right, down on Kootenay Lake. And they go into they drift about northwest, in a northwesterly direction, into an area that had not been mapped. But they'd heard vague rumors of silver in this area. And they were going on a vague rumors prospectors are prone to do. So they stay up there for about 3 days. They're running out of grub, they get turned around. Actually, they get lost. So to find their bearings, they head up a 7,000-foot peak. And at the top of that peak, as they come around the corner, there in front of them is about a 4 or 5 foot band of almost solid galena. This is silver ore.
This is the ore right here. So this is a like exposed to the surface, a band of what they went for.
You bet it was. They couldn't believe their eyes. And looking at it, looking at the way the ore came out of the ground, they knew it was high-grade silver, and indeed it was. Some of that silver, Mike, ran up to 1,000 ounces per ton. 1,000 ounces per ton. Even at 50 cents an ounce, that's a king's ransom. So these two head back into Ainsworth, and as it always happens, no matter where the discovery is, if it's gold or it's silver, word always gets out. Word did drift out, and soon there's a stampede of prospectors into the area. Now, it's a two-pronged assault. They leave from Ainsworth and they leave from Nelson. From Ainsworth, they head up the side of Kootenay Lake, and they head up to a little flat up there, which eventually became Caslow, head inland and into the Slocan Slope. From Nelson, they head down the Kootenay River, up the Slocan River, up the Little Slocan, and up over a very, very treacherous, difficult piece of terrain called Slocan Lake, and they head up into it that way. So this two-pronged assault brings thousands of miners into this area, trap prospectors, the whole works. And they are all looking for new ground. And of course, some of the ground was already staked by the time they got there. The Rico, the Noble Five, the Payne, the Slocan Star, and these were literally world beaters. Literally world beaters. And what happens, of course, then they begin looking, they say this is going to be a long-term silver fields. There's no doubt about it. That this is going to be, they think it's going to last a century. And some of it does, actually, we'll find out later on. And they decide to build two new towns. And one of the new towns that is established on the shores of Kootenay Lake is Caslow. And that is more or less the eastern terminus to the Slocan Slope.
Okay.
But there's another town that's established on the western side, and this was a town they first called El Dorado. Okay? And this is a term meaning, it's a Spanish term.
Meaning gold, usually.
Well, essentially, it refers to gold. But they decide after a few months that won't do because there isn't much gold in this country, but there is a lot of silver, so they decide to call it New Denver.
Because Denver, of course,
Sure.
the silver lode, the Comstock area of the United States.
And what happens, of course, is that other towns spring up. Sandon and Whitewater and Silverton and Slocan City. So a whole bunch of towns, Three Forks, other towns in there, smaller towns as well, and smaller camps. And the whole country is buzzing with activity. Several thousand claims are staked, and dozens of mines come into protection. And so what happens, of course, is that New Denver itself becomes kind of a miner's mecca on that side of the Slocan slope.
On the west side.
Yeah, for sure it does. And it attracts a lot of individuals who want to get into the silver fields or the silver country close by, close at hand. And of course, right down through New Denver itself comes Carpenter Creek, and Carpenter Creek leads right into the heart of the silver fields. So, so this is the establishment of New Denver. And on its heels, Mike, comes the big boys. And the big boys are the K&S, the Kaslo and Slocan Railway.
Without the railway, what could you do?
That's right. And so the K&S heads in from Kaslo. This is a little Great Northern subsidiary, comes in on a narrow gauge track.
Clunky little locomotives. It didn't look like a real railway at all, did it?
Right.
Did the job, though.
Magnificent engineering feat. Absolutely magnificent. Well, the CPR doesn't like the Great Northern, of course, James J. Hill, and they decide to build a competing railway on the west side. So they come down from Nakusp, and they call this railway the N&S.
The Nakusp and Slocan.
Nakusp and Slocan. Comes down, and it skirts right by, just above New Denver. And here you see a shot, and we look down from the N&S railway. This is probably 1896, Mike. We're looking straight down on New Denver, and this is early New Denver. The buildings are starting to take shape, and there's a great deal of growth taking place between 1896, 1897, 1898.
We've got some remarkable maps here. Now, maps are, of course, the stock in trade of getting to know where we are.
Yeah.
But these are special maps. Who commissioned to have these drawn?
Now, what it is, these are fire insurance maps. Very tough to get, Mike. This is the only set I know that is of New Denver. And this is 1897, and it gives you an idea of a town starting to take shape.
Yeah.
And there were two major avenues in New Denver. One is 6th Avenue, right down there.
Yeah.
And you can see it. And the other one is El Dorado Avenue. And
Right
notice,
down along
not
the
street
lake.
and not street and avenue, it's avenue and avenue, which is rather interesting.
Because avenues usually go east and west, but this had avenues east and west, north and
North
south.
and south, any way you wanted, you still had an avenue in New Denver, okay? And
Is there a reason for that?
I don't know. I can't explain that, Mike.
Interesting anomaly, okay.
And this is part of the town. This shows part of the town. It shows the famous New Denver Club where all the mining magnates got together and wheeled and dealed over various properties in the immediate area and, of course, on the Slocan slope itself.
Sure.
And then you went down along El Dorado Avenue, and this is, of course, the Grand Central Hotel. And here's a plate, Mike, from the Grand Central.
Look at that. And this, I mean, modern California colors. I mean, if you went into any restaurant and look at the fine script on that.
Oh, yeah.
And was the Grand Central Hotel really grand?
Well, the Grand Central Hotel is what we would call a second-rate hotel. There's not much doubt about that. It was not the first-class hotel. There were some first-class hotels in New Denver. There were 9 hotels in New Denver, some of them on this map. Some of them came later than 1897. There are 4 or 5 on this particular map. Another one here, Mike,
The St. James.
is the St. James.
Now
And
we
the
get-
St. James, and here's a photograph of the St. James with 19 people out in front, plus 2 dogs. One looking between two little bits of the porch upstairs. You can see his head just out there, and the other one down below. 2 of the people are on horseback, and the St. James was really a first-class hotel. It was one of the better hotels in New Denver.
Well, it was a step back from the waterfront, I guess, eh? I mean, the riffraff would stay down on the waterfront.
Well, not really, Mike, because when you look at the waterfront, you get the classic hotel of the Old West. And this is the famous New Market. Now we'll take a look inside the New Market, and here it is, 1914.
This is a little later on, but it
That's
shows
right,
the
it's-
opulence of the interior.
That's right. It shows the opulence of the interior and a man registering at the desk. And we know it's 1914 by the calendar on the back. So this is 20 years after the New Market has been built. It was built in, 10 years after.
Yeah.
No, 20 years after, because it was built in about 1894. And then we see the outside of the New Market.
This is a spectacular mark of a hotel.
In my considered opinion, when I go all through the Pacific Slope, from all through British Columbia, right into the Yukon, I don't think there was any hotel that was as impressive as the New Market. I don't know. I wandered through it as a kid, and and I knew it well, and perhaps that's I have a certain attachment to it, but I wandered through a lot of the other hotels as well.
Yeah.
But here it was, and it was designed beautifully. It really was, and it graced that area for about 80 years, Mike. It was really
For 80 years.
For 80 years.
Most of these things run into trouble with the income and disappear a lot earlier.
Yeah, well, what happened is it was eventually burned in 1900.
It did burn like...
Yeah, it did, 1973, in a rather unusual fire, which I will not deliberate on for any great length of time.
So this map also is, the fact that this is a fire insurance map, does it show the New Market? Where would the New Market
New Market's
have been?
right down at the corner, Mike.
Right down at the corner.
And of course, this is logical, because this is where the sternwheelers landed. There's the sternwheeler dock that comes in there, and of course, many of the sternwheelers landed, and of course, the famous SS Slocan, which was a CPR sternwheeler, and so the CPR had the link, the NNS and the SS Slocan.
This is, I mean, this is a treasure. Where did you find this particular set of maps?
Well, actually, a map dealer held that for me, knowing that I was interested in the history of the West Kootenay, specifically in the boundary country, and anytime certain dealers have these maps, and they decide to hold them for me.
So obviously, with all of these folks around and the opulent hotels and everything was going along just according to plan.
Yeah.
Silver ingots, how much would these be worth at that time?
Well, those are 10 ounces each, Mike, so they would be worth about $5 each, that's all.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, today they're worth about just about $50 each in Canadian funds.
But they were hauling stuff like this out of there hand over fist.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. A lot of great stories, some which haven't been told. And I think the story of Joseph Colbrook Harris deserves to be told. Do not confuse Joseph Colbrook Harris with John Morgan Harris. John Morgan Harris lived in Sandon. Joseph Colbrook Harris lived between Silverton and New Denver.
Was there any conflict between them at that day? Did one Harris get the other's mail or anything? Separate characters.
Actually, occasionally they did, but that's
another story.
We're not alluding to that.
Okay.
What we're alluding to is Joseph Colbrook Harris was an aristocrat, really he was. Came to Victoria in the early years and decided he didn't like the social life there, decided to move to the interior. And he was a very, very intellectual sort of individual. Established a little ranch which he called the Bosun Ranch, which he thought at that time would eventually evolve into a great fruit growing area. He was wrong, but he was a very highly well-read man as well. And he established the Bosun Ranch because he had a man who worked for him, and he was a bosun. And one day he's clearing trees, and he comes across a fallen tree, and under the fallen tree, he sees galena ore. Well, he very quickly realizes what he's got. He stakes the ground. He eventually sells it for $7,500. This is 1898. Now, $7,500, you can multiply that by 40, Mike. That's equivalent to about $300,000 today. And so $300,000 with no income tax in those days, that's the equivalent, is a lot of money.
He's a millionaire.
In most terms, he didn't really need all that money, and he felt a little embarrassed about it because he'd obtained it so easily. So what does he decide to do? He decides to be a benefactor to the town. And he builds an opera house, which he calls the Bosun Hall. And it's right downtown in New Denver. And it seats several hundred people. And it's really quite opulent. He doesn't even stay for the opening. He goes back to Britain, meets his wife-to-be on the way back, comes back, and of course marries her and comes back and lives in the area. But he was typical of the individuals who made discoveries like that. And there were other quite well-off individuals in the area. Old George Williamson became what many people consider the richest man in New Denver. And no doubt about it that he was extremely well off.
How much would he be worth?
Well, in today's funds, it would be equivalent to several $1 million, which was a lot of money in those days. And Reginald Lestock Forbes.
Reginald Lestock Forbes, you say?
Indeed, very aristocratic.
Were all these guys remittance men, or were they adventurers from the old country?
I think probably he was a younger son. His father was a Scottish nobleman, and he became the town constable and stayed there for many years. And so you had all sorts of individuals from titled backgrounds. You also had other characters like Wee Willie Howarth, or sometimes called Weary Willie Howarth.
Weary Willie Howarth.
Yeah, and he was a prospector who ranged all up and down that Slocan slope. Pick-handle Grimes was another one. The Yellow Kid, which I mentioned before.
I remember the Yellow Kid.
Sure, and so you had a lot of individuals who were, Roughlock Perry was another one. So you had a lot of individuals, most of them with nicknames. Prospectors who'd been in the field for a long, long time, usually they had a nickname.
That was standard in mining country, though. I mean, I've been to Cumberland, and everybody's named Carrot or something else apart from their traditional name.
Sure. There's no doubt about that at all. And what happened, of course, is that now we get into a more refined town, and every refined town has to have a newspaper. Here's one of the newspapers, Mike, and this is the Slocan Mining Review. And it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
And there's the Slocan.
January 30th,
Slocan
1908, this particular one is.
And typical. There it advertises the Slocan Lake Fruitlands. And what it says here, couple of items. Lovers of fisticuffs will be given an opportunity of gazing upon two exponents of the manly art at Slocan City next Saturday night. This will be a genuine contest for blood between Terrible Crow and Slasher Harris, both well known in the district, it being the outcome of a rough-and-tumble free-for-all some days ago. And they fight under the Marquis of Queensberry rules, which are essentially pretty rough stuff. And the mining camps were pretty rough stuff.
Bare knuckle. And
yeah.
It's amazing that this paper is still in existence. You can see that it was never designed to last 100 years, but
of course not.
It has.
Yeah. Well, it has essentially, yeah. I mean, it's not
close.
It's not great, and it talks about a number of other things in this paper at the time. And this paper is, only 80 years old, but it's nevertheless quite interesting. Talks about a determined case of attempted murder occurred in town last Saturday afternoon. Two young fellows were quarreling over a beautiful girl, and the rejected lover attacked his favored rival with a stick of cordwood, which really isn't the nicest thing to do, And he'd floored him with the cordwood and was going to finish him off, and one of the Chinese individuals came to the rescue and beat this guy off.
So that's the Slocan Mining Review. Was it in competition with the Slocan Record, or was that just another paper?
Another name for the same paper.
Okay. These people loved their festivals as well,
Sure.
and there's lots of Americans, lots of British here.
Yep.
This picture is of a memorial to Queen Victoria.
That's right.
What's happening here?
This is a memorial parade to Queen Victoria. She died in 1901, so here we see probably a fraternal order coming down the street, and they are parading down 6th Avenue towards the Newmarket, where they will probably have a few drinks to Queen Victoria in the Newmarket.
To turn from somber to less
Sure.
than sober. This is associated with that. Now, this would be a badge that these miners would wear?
Western Federation of Miners.
And it's black, and that would be done in memoriam. Whenever
Sure.
they were recognizing the death of somebody, this is what they'd wear.
Sure, miners came from all over. Some of them belonged to the fraternal orders. Probably this one came from Rossland, and they would be there as well, Rossland and so on. And so they came down, they wore it black and white, and the other side they wore on more festive occasions. That would be meetings, opera house, etc., etc.
Isn't that wonderful? I mean,
Sure.
and this side with the American flag and the Canadian and the British flag doing the job.
Oh yeah, it's just great. And it was typical of the entertainment of the day. Another one was, and this photograph here shows a hose reel race, and the two teams here. One is Kaslo, KFD, Kaslo Fire Department, in black. And the other one, of course, is New Denver. Probably Kaslo had the better team. But there'd be lots of money placed on a race like that, Mike.
Yeah. Okay. In addition to those kinds of things, all of these hotels going great guns, all sorts of deals being made. The place is hopping. When did it stop hopping?
Well, it stopped hopping really between 1900, I think, and 1910. But in 1910, two things happened. The Great Fire of 1910 devastating fire, swept all through that country. And to give you an idea, and it swept square mile upon square mile, and some of the miners were killed. For instance, there's a classic story of a guy called John Batt. He's standing with 3 of his muckers in one of the mines. They see the fire coming, jumping from tree to tree. 3 of them head right back into the tunnel. He doesn't. He heads for Fish Lake, which is about half a mile away. And he makes it to Fish Lake, just barely. And he said he fled for his life. His legs were better than his use of English.
Yeah.
But he was the lucky one. The other 3 went back in the tunnel, and of course the oxygen at least the fire sucked all the oxygen out of the tunnel, and these 3 were gone just like that. But the other thing that happened in 1910, a guy called George Aylard down near Silverton is working on the big lode, what they didn't know was the big lode, but a mine called the Standard. He hits a body of ore that is over 40 feet wide. It is absolutely staggering. The largest discovery of lode silver in British Columbia to that date. He becomes a millionaire overnight.
That keeps things going for a while.
Oh,
because
sure,
there's a depression happening about this time in the world anyway. But Allard's find is going to keep it all cooking.
Allard's find actually keeps New Denver and Silverton on just above the level of prosperity that they need to survive for about right through 1910, right through to about the late 1920s, Mike.
We'll take a break and be back in just a second to talk more about where New Denver goes right after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We're in New Denver, and we've made it into the 20s. Mr. Allard has kept it from completely flagging after the big fire.
Yep.
Any other finds of note about the same time?
Yeah, Lucky Clarence Cunningham hit magnificent ore at the Queen Bass up near a place called the Alamo. And he took out over $1.25 million in one kidney-shaped block of ore. It was just staggering.
Lucky Clarence is a good name for him.
Lucky Clarence Cunningham.
Now, you refer to kidney-shaped ore. What are you talking about there?
Kidney-shaped ore means this, Mike, that it comes down in veins like this, and suddenly it just bells out into a large kidney of ore. And it happens all through that Slocan country. I'm inclined to think that the Slocan, there will still be discoveries being made because of this peculiar geological feature. There will still be discoveries being made 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now.
Because the part that breaks to the surface is only a narrow neck, with the exception of Mr. Allard's finding.
Sure.
But then it's more ample below.
Yeah, and some of the old mines, all of them had these kidney-shaped pockets of ore. So that I think, and they're tough to find sometimes, so I think it's the luck of the draw, Mike.
So the 30s really did kill this area off. There were no particular great ore bodies found?
It was going to become a ghost town like Phoenix. Everyone felt that was going to happen. World War II starts. By 1942, Mike, they get a revival. And what happens is the Japanese are sent in internment in the towns of the interior, such as Greenwood, such as Slocan City, Sandon, and also New Denver. So the Japanese come in, they add a new lease of life to the town, a lot of them go into logging, and the town survives extremely well. And I think it will be there, New Denver, in my estimation, because of all of its scenic surroundings, because of its potential as a tourism area, I think it'll be there hundreds of years from now.
Of all the towns we talk about, it is still there. Sandon is gone. Now, Phoenix is gone, but New Denver is sitting there, and very similar to the way it was. If we took our fire insurance map back there, could we sort of wander it through?
I would think you would find on that fire insurance map, and we only looked at half of that map, there were 100 buildings on that map, Mike, approximately 15 or 20 of those buildings are still standing. There are a number of buildings still on 6th Avenue, and one of the major ones there is the Bank of Montreal. And then there's the IOF building and several other large store buildings. Most of those on El Dorado Avenue are gone. A number of private houses in the area are still standing, and really a town of some style, even today.
Excellent. Oh, that's so good to know. And do they have their historical perspective? Because not much of this history is written down.
No, they actually have a very fine museum, and it's surprising because most of those other small towns in the area have a history written on them. There isn't really a lot on New Denver.
But there it was, 1891, originally El Dorado, called New Denver when it had to coincide with its silver heritage, and then its growth from there. And Mr. Allard in his 40-foot vein of silver
now heads into its 2nd century, Mike.
What an excellent thing, of course. Happy centennial to the folks in New Denver. And thank you for being a part of our show today. We've looked at New Denver, and we sincerely hope you'll join us again next time for Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, when we'll take a look at more at the mining history of British Columbia. We'll see you then.